Jules, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Jewel Ivy and I am the owner of Jewel Ivy, the clothing brand. On my YouTube channel, I make videos on fashion, sewing, and self-care. So if any of those interest you, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss when I post in the future. I'm really excited for today's YouTube video. I'm going to be showing you guys from start to finish how I made the underbust corset that I wore in my birthday photo shoot. I'll insert a picture here and I'll also have more of the photo shoot linked on my Instagram down below. It was so stunning. It turned out so bomb. Like, I love it so much. Check out the photos on my Instagram because they're just really stunning and I love them. But yeah, I'm going to be showing you guys from start to finish how I made this corset and breaking it all down. So I'll start off with the draping on the mannequin and then we'll get into making the pattern and doing the fittings and adjustments, and then I'll get into making the final one and adding all the embellishments and all the final touches. So if you guys want to know how I made this underbust corset, just keep watching.
Step 1. Marking your style lines. I mark a line down the center of my dress form and that will be the length of my underbust corset. Then I mark a line on the top center and I take that out 1 inch, and from that point I begin to create the curve that goes under my bust. Then I'll take my tape measure and make sure that that curve lines up with my underwire. I extend that top line going all the way to the center back. Then I mark a line parallel to my center back, keeping it an inch away to allow space to lace up the corset. Going back to the front, I start making my bottom line and I'm going for a nice V shape and bringing that up to my waistline. Now I'm marking my front centerpiece and I'm lining that up with the apex of my bust, and I'm making sure to keep it at least 1 inch away from the center to allow room for that center busk and also the boning. Next, I mark a line on my side seam, and then I make my third line in the center of those two seams, and I'm making sure to leave a 1/2 inch in between that line and the underbust line so that the underwire and the boning match up perfectly. And for my back side, it's super easy. I'm just having 2 pieces and I'm following the line that came on my dress form. And this is what that will look like and how all of my lines will look like when I'm all done. Next step is draping. I start with my piece of muslin, making sure to mark the grain line, and I'm taking that grain line and lining it up with the center style line that we made. Then I will begin smoothing and pinning towards that second seam, making sure my fabric is laying flat against my dress form. Once that is done, you want to take a pencil and mark around all of your style lines. Then you want to label your piece so that it does not get mixed up once it is off the dress form. For draping our second panel, you want to line the grain line from your piece of muslin with the center of the corset, not with the slanted second seam, but with the straight center line. Then you want to smooth and pin it like we did to the first panel and trace all of your lines, making sure to mark your waistline. Then you want to label that piece, and then you want to mark your grain line. And I accidentally messed up. It should follow this little straight line. I accidentally curved it, but I corrected it in the end. Now we move on to step 3, making the pattern. Start by marking a line 1 inch away from the edge on your grid paper and then lining the edge of your pattern piece up with that line. Then you want to take your tracing wheel and trace around all of the edges of your pattern piece, making sure to mark your waistline. Next, you want to go over all of those markings with your pencil and then go in with your ruler and clean up all of the edges. Then you want to mark your grain line. Now you're going to take your ruler and mark a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both edges of your pattern piece. And because we marked our full length on our dress form, we don't need to add seam allowance to the top or bottom of our pattern pieces. This is what all of your pieces should look like when you're done. Now I'm going to show you how to make your back panel. Start by marking a line 3/8 away from the center back, and then mark a second line 3/8 away from that line, and then a third line 3/8 away from that line. Those two outer lines will be used as boning channels, and the line in between will be where you mark your eyelets. Make sure to keep your eyelets 1/4 inch away from the edge to allow for your binding, and space the eyelets 1 inch apart. These are all of my completed pattern pieces. Now you can make your mock-up and try that on, but because I didn't have a lot of fabric, I just pinned these pieces together and tried them on myself, and I liked the fit, so I just went ahead and sewed my final garment. Moving on to step 4, which is sewing your final garment. I have all my pattern pieces cut out. I'm using 3 layers, and for my back panels, I'm using 2 layers of the velvet and 1 layer of the cotton muslin. I start by laying the right piece of my busk onto the lining of the right side of my corset. Then I mark around the loops with a marker, and I also mark the top and the bottom. Now I will place my lining onto the other 2 pieces of my fabric, and I will sew in between these little marks. I begin at one of the blue lines, making sure to backstitch, and then I continue down all the way to the next blue line. Once I'm at the little gaps, I lift my presser foot up, slide my fabric forward, do my backstitching again, and continue sewing to the next line. And this is what you should have. The little loops right there are loose, and everything in between that is sewn down. Now you can take the right piece of your bust, making sure that the side with the buttons is facing up, and you could slide the hooks in between your main fabric and your lining fabric. Once you flip it to the right side, this is what it should look like. Now do a row of top stitching along the side of your bust, going all the way to the top and bottom to stop your bust from moving. I add pins to mine to make it easier to sew. I use a zipper foot so I can get close enough to my busk, and I make sure to sew slow so that I do not break my needle on accident. And this is what it should look like when you are done. Here is the right side of my corset all put together. Now I'm going to show you how to do it to the left. Before installing my left busk, I'm going to sew a line 1/4 of an inch away from the center. Now I'm going to take the left side of my busk, and I'm going to make sure the buttons that are closest to the edge are facing the right side of my corset, and I'm going to hook that onto the right busk. Now I'm placing the stitch line on my left front piece onto the right front piece. Now I'm rubbing my finger on the top of the buttons and marking those with my Sharpie. Now you're going to take a tool that's a good enough size and punch out all of those holes, making sure to only go through your first 2 layers of fabric, not your lining fabric. Now you can take the left side of your busk and place those buttons into the holes, making sure that the side that has the buttons closest to it is along your center seam line. Once all of your buttons are in place, flip your lining to the back side and do a row of top stitching along the edge of your busk, just like we did on the other side. Here is my left busk, all complete. Now I'm going to see how well it lines up with my right side. Now to attach the rest of my panels, I am taking my first 2 layers, not my lining layer, of both sides of my panels, and I'm going to place those right sides together and sew a line 1/2 inch from the edge. Once I have that completed, I'm going to sew the lining, and it's a little hard to explain, so just watch it on the screen. I break it down very easily. Once I place those together, I'm going to do a row of stitching along that stitch line, sewing through all of the layers. And this is what that will look like when you're all done. Now you could flip the lining and the main fabric together. Now do a row of stitching 3/8 of an inch away from that line to create your boning channel. Once you repeat those steps to all the rest of your panels, you will now be able to place your spiral steel boning into all of the boning channels. Moving on to my back panels, I place my pattern pieces right sides together, and I sew a seam 1/4 of an inch away from the center back. Now I'm going to do a row of stitching through all of the layers of my back panel, and only these 2 layers and not the lining of my other panel. Now I'm going to place those two panels right sides together and do a row of stitching a 1/2 inch away from the edge through all of the layers. Once that's done, this is what it should look like from the inside. Now I'm going to push my seam allowance towards the center of my corset, and I'm going to flip my lining piece over by 1/2 inch and place it on top of that seam allowance. I'm going to pin that in place and do an invisible stitch by hand with my needle and thread. This is what that looks like when I'm all done. Now I'm going to sew a line of stitches in this seam and also 3/8 of an inch away from that seam to create a boning channel. Here's what that looks like when you're finished. Now I'm sewing another row of stitches 3/8 of an inch away from my center back to create my final boning channel. We're almost to the finish line, guys. Now we need to put on our binding. I cut out a bunch of strips at 1.5 inches wide to fit around my whole corset. I place my binding along the edge of my corset, right sides together, and I'll sew that at 1/4 inch. And I fold my edges towards the wrong side to create a nice finish. Here's what that will look like when it's done. Now you can flip it to the wrong side and take your binding and fold it in half, and then fold it one more time and pin it in place along the bottom edge. Now I'm going to hand stitch that in place. Here is the completed binding. Now I'm going to repeat that to the top edge. Now for your underbust lining, you want to sew that in place, making sure it's overlapping on the side edge. Once you have that complete, you can now insert your underwire. Moving on to our final part, which is adding the embellishments. And I decided to switch out that gold binding for this black binding, and I really like this look a lot better. I have all of my little gems and accessories set out, and now I'm just gonna go ahead and attach those to my corset.
Alright, Jewels, that is the end of this YouTube video and sewing tutorial. I hope you guys really enjoyed and you learned some knowledge on how to make an underbust corset. If you guys make any recreations of this or take any knowledge from this, let me know in the comments or tag me on your Instagrams or TikToks. I have all my socials linked below. I would really love to see like everybody's creations. If you guys do remake this, I think that would be super dope. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and thank you so much for staying tuned to the end. If you like this, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and share this video with somebody who might find it interesting as well. Yeah, that's all for today's video. I'll catch you guys in my next one. Bye.